Hello, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm honored to moderate today's panel, and we got some amazing lineup, including some of the most inspiring and influential leaders in the gaming industry. And during today's panel, we will dive into different topics, including the evolution of gaming narratives to mainstream adoption, challenges, monetization strategies, and retention mechanisms. Is going to be very insightful. And to kick off the panel, I would like to invite each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and how they firstly got into the Web3 gaming space. Let's start from Yat.
Okay, well, I mean, I just gave a talk, so I probably won't spend too much time, but maybe I'll talk about we got introduced into Web3 through CryptoKitties. Our studio in Vancouver called Fuel Powered actually had a hand in helping build CryptoKitties in 2017. And we basically got a front row seat and effectively never looked back after.
Cool, thank you. Michael, please.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm CEO and founder of Elympics. So my backstory is I used to work on mobile games for several years, working on free-to-play and obviously focusing on releasing to mobile app stores. And a few years ago, I started Olympics, which is a company that provides technology for multiplayer. And that's when we also, 2 years ago, moved into the Web3 space and decided to integrate it, strongly believing that that's one of the ways, that's the right way for us to adopt players, Web2 players into Web3, giving them value.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Inal, gaming lead at Ton Foundation. Basically, I got into Web3 gaming like almost 6 years ago, building my own games, then basically building even like NFT marketplaces before OpenSea. So it was like a long journey. Yeah, I joined Ton Foundation like a bit over a year ago. Before that, I was a co-founder of gaming studio building Web3 games in different ecosystems as well.
Interesting. And Stan, please.
Hey guys, I'm Stan Fiedor. Back in 2010 to 2012, I started my own game development studio, that traditional games, and with it was evolving. Then around 3 years ago, I handed over the management, started to mentor and advise some early founders and teams. And among those was a friend of mine from the university who actually started to get into Web3. And that actually triggered me to also get involved in Web3. And last year, I was approached by WeMade and Wemix, which is a huge Korean game development company, which is developing games for the last 24 years, so a lot of time. And for the last 4 years, they're building like the Wemix blockchain ecosystem for gaming.
Thank you all for your introduction. So before we dive into the current game market narratives, I'm very curious that from your perspective, that what were the predominant narratives in Web3 gaming during the last cycle? That started with Sam first.
So it depends what we exactly say as the last cycle. But generally, let's say there was the wave where play to earn was the big thing, right? But then we've seen in many cases that very of those projects did not have the sustainability, that it was not possible to keep this play to earn in the long term. So I think that generally what we are seeing right now in Web3 was what was happening within gaming itself earlier, because finally it's Web3 is maturing. Right, we see that there to the market are coming real games where the player can get high quality content, where he can get very engaged into it and stick with the games for a long time. But the cool thing about everything is that it's not only that he's going to be spending money inside of the game for years, but then he also owns the aspects, right? So that's why I think we're going to see Web3 becoming as mature as we have the Web2 currently. So I think that's the ultimate goal. But of course, in between, we have like the meme coins and crazy stuff happening, right? So definitely Web3 is way much more dynamic than Web2.
Second.
Well, in my opinion, right now we see several changes in the industry. The first one, obviously, is shift from Ponzinomics to I don't want to say to airdropnomics, but looks like that. I mean, many games, they just say, okay, now you'll get incentives, not in a form of these tokens, but maybe an airdrop in the future. Not sure I love it that much, but it is what it is. The next thing I want to highlight is basically simplification of the onboarding process. In my opinion, all the games in the industry, almost all the games in the industry, they just try to make the onboarding process, the distribution better, onboarding process for new users better. If you compare games nowadays with games like 3 years ago, I mean Web3 games, it is way easier for players to start doing something. Sometimes it means that they are not like purely Web3 game, they're like more a mix of Web3. Hybrid mechanics. I think that this is the way we have to move to onboard like millions and tens of millions of users, and I actually love this.
Yeah, so for me, like in the last cycle, there were some, let's say, mistakes made. As a person that remembers how free-to-play was born, basically, it was born with a technology that enabled developers to do something new, to sell stuff, to sell in-game items within the game itself. And so over the years, like developers tried all new things. Utilizing that, and sort of the knowledge of how you should do it grew over time, over those 10 or more years or so. And Web3, similarly, as a technology, I think there were mistakes made in that part that we can basically, in free-to-play games, we have hard currency, soft currency, and let's move all that on chain. And it was not enough considered, let's say, of what are the consequences of that. And I actually have to agree on the point of airdrops being the marketing cost, basically. So I like that in this cycle we're more focusing on, first of all, of course, user onboarding, and I couldn't agree more. And second of all, giving a lot more thought into the fact that we're not just generating coins and doing Ponzinomics, giving them away to players, but also we're thinking about the cost that it implies in the long term.
Sure. I mean, maybe just to draw a little bit on the airdrop analogy, we also have to look at the evolution. Airdrops before were farmed by bots. They were farmed by machines. People didn't know who the user was. And as the sort of industry evolved, we started to identify, okay, proof of humanity, are you actually a person? Okay, that was one test. Actually, are you proof of player? Are you actually playing? And then you get to the next level of proof. What level are you? And all that kind of stuff, right? You can see games like Pixels, for instance, evolving that, where it's not just you're able to earn the tokens because you said you're using it or marketing it. You're actually playing the game. You're getting to level 1, level 5, level 10. Anyway, that's sort of one, and I think this evolution will evolve. And I think the big benefit, of course, it goes to the end user as opposed to going to a platform that sort of extracts the tax. But in terms of narratives, I think the big narratives, and some assumptions were made that I think we need to revisit, right? So play to earn to me isn't dead. Play to earn is just one element of ownership. It was just a part of the ownership that we focused on because it had such an impact because of COVID, right? When you think about what happened in the Philippines, people didn't have any way to make money and they were locked in. They were not even allowed to go out to do the jobs they were supposed to do. And then this came. And I think, in some ways, I think COVID accelerated the whole Web3 crypto movement just because it forced us to go more digital and became more. So that's kind of one area. So I don't think it's dead, but it's not the main thing. It's one thing of ownership, right? When you look at the blockchain gaming sort of report over the last 3 years, the number one reason why people like to play blockchain games still comes down to ownership as the number one reason. But ownership can mean many things. Ownership can mean social status as well. It doesn't just have to be about money. I think some of the misconceptions, I think there was 2 misconceptions that came. The first one was brands, traditional brands. Not to say that they're not powerful, but traditional brands are not in the business of giving ownership to others. Right? A Web2 game company doesn't normally give their IP to their players. That's not how they're constructed. But we assumed that just bringing a big Web2 brand, whether this is a sports brand or whether this is a gaming brand, will automatically bring people into Web3. But the problem was is that we could only put them into Web3 without actually realizing that they can have ownership. So it was permissioned. Oh, I can have this NFT, but I can't use it this way. I can't sell it this way. I can't trade it that way. Suddenly, you don't have ownership at all. So I think that was one element that we thought we could bring in users this way, but it didn't really quite work because of all the restrictions. The other one is, I think and this is a common thing, that I think we see is Web2 game studios think they know economics. They do not, right? They know how to make Ponzonomics, as it were, because every game economy is a Ponzi in its own mechanism because they're using their own currency, and it's not meant to have value, right? In a Web2 game, the game is the supportive element, but in a Web3 game, asset ownership becomes a key part, and so that means you need to be much more thoughtful on economics, which we're seeing today, but in the early days you didn't. So just moving a Web2 game into Web3 was not enough, but a lot of people went for that narrative. They just, 10 million users playing Web2, let's put them in Web3, and something will happen. And nothing happened, right? Precisely for that reason. Not just because of financial literacy, but also because the studios behind it didn't understand actual economics, right? So again, it's part of the evolution, but I think these are some of the assumptions that we had to sort of change.
Like the currencies in games were not meant to be traded between players, and there's a huge implication that that's enabled and that's permissionless, as you said. So
yes,
yeah, designers have to take that into consideration, and obviously.
And I think the other thing is that less so in the East, but much more so in the West. I think most Web2 game designers are quite socialist in their thinking, right? They have an idea of meritocracy around skill, right? So that means that you can't buy your way into things, but that's not how a capitalist system works. In Asia, it's okay to pay money to get a little ahead, but in the West, it's not, right? So when you buy a skin in Fortnite, you don't actually get more power, right? It can look good. So translating that, if you're a Western gamer, you go, wait, you can pay money to get ahead? That seems wrong to that audience. And I think the final thing I would also say, maybe for those of you who don't know about this, but in the game industry, game developers and game designers don't get paid a lot of money. And I think this is a big factor as well, right? In other industries, people there make a lot more money. And so they understand and appreciate capital value. But actually in traditional game companies, people love to play games and they join the game studios for the love of the game. But they are paid amongst, like, if you compare the skill of a game developer who makes games and he could maybe join Google as an engineer, there's a 3 to 4x salary difference between the two. One's passion, and the other one is, let's call it money, if you will. But it also means that they're not sort of understanding financial literacy and the value of money. And I think that's much more so in the West than it is in the East, which is why in Asia, Web3 gaming is taking off.
So a lot of panelists talking about the current issues in Web3 gaming, and then the difficulties of onboarding Web2 gamers into Web3 game. So is there any strategies that you will say that will be effectively or just facilitate to have a smoother adoption?
So I can start with that, because just on the 13th or 14th of March, WeMade did launch our new game called Night Crows, and there are a couple elements which are important over here. For example, when you start the game, of course you can log in with your socials, right? So it's super smooth, easy. You don't have to create your nickname and create all of the passwords, then confirms and so on. So that's the way to make it as smooth and easy for the player as possible. And then the other part is that actually till you reach the level 45 of your character, you are not even aware that it is in the back, it's actually a Web3 game. Because that's the moment when you can connect your wallet. But you are not even being pushed to be doing that. Meaning that really those people need to be engaged to reach to that point. What's important is that through this grinding or leveling to this level, you as a player, you appreciate what you were able to achieve. So actually your character, which is already a high level at that moment, is valuable for you, but also for the other people. And then comes the ownership elements, which makes a no-brainer for you that, okay, I can now own it, right? And I can trade it, I can put it on the marketplace, and so on and so on. So that's, I think, one of those aspects, so super easy onboarding, like hybrid approach, and then showing actually the value, right? Teaching the players to have the value. And one thing that I don't know if I might actually say, but at the very beginning, the game was launched last year only in Korea as a traditional Web2 game. And we see in our data, and we have around 400,000 concurrent users. So in this given second, there are 400,000 people playing that game. And what we see is that for the day 30 retention, we have close to double the amount of the retention as it was in the traditional Web2 version without the Web3 enablement. That shows that definitely, it gets Web3, allows the people to even be more into the game. That's one thing. And the ownership keeps them for longer as well. So it's actually good for A, the developers, B, for the whole environment, because if the players, if the users are playing longer the game and they then actually have the ownership, then it's a bigger value in the whole ecosystem.
Yeah,
Maybe
for us, actually, I would say that we basically believe in, like, again, distribution channel and social things, because, yeah, we are partners of Telegram, so we actually think that for Web3 games in the, like, this year, next year, the biggest bet that we make is about social interactions between people. And I can mention, let's say, Notcoin, for example. I guess everybody knows about the Notcoin, and like 35 million people they got in just like 3 months with basically zero marketing costs. I mean, we can count their airdrops that are coming as a marketing cost, but no direct marketing costs they spent through these like 3 months, and 94% of people there were invited by their friends. So our biggest bet here is about like social interactions and players inviting their friends, their family to play like different games, and making the onboarding process for new players as simple as possible. And again, I actually think that distribution channels is really important right now for every Web3 game. I mean, it's great that we have, I don't know, Steam, Apple Store, App Store, Google Play, wherever, but for every single Web3 game, the distribution there is kind of limited. Onboarding is hard, especially if you want to make it like really non-custodial, if you want users to actually own their in-game items, it is really hard to onboard them. So we at Ton, with the Telegram team, we try to solve this problem at the first place, like to give people, to give game developers actually a way to distribute their games, a way to attract users with a very low cost because of all these social interactions, and at the same time give them like a true ownership, instead of saying, hey, this is like kind of Web3 game, but you do not own anything because we simplified your onboarding process and generated account for you on our backend. We think this is dead end. I mean, maybe it's like it will take some time to like go through this process. I realize that this is not the best way as well, and to actually have really Web3 games in the, I don't know, year or two. But anyways, we want to make everything possible now to overcome these problems.
Yeah, and there are lots of like users on Telegram right now, so it's a really good start for them to like get in touch, like, okay, what is Web3, what is like this kind of mini game. And I think, yeah, I want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so first of all, you know, we're one of the largest validators for Ton, so we're big fans of the Ton ecosystem precisely because of distribution. I agree. I think the difference, though, is that because Telegram, by its nature, has a very decentralized perspective, it is the ideal platform for that. That's not true for the App Store. It's not true for Google, right? So they're not the same comparisons, right? You have freedom to do stuff that you can do on Telegram, and specifically with Ton. I think one of the really powerful things that I like what Stan said around sort of, you know, get to level 45. He said, you know, that to me, this is actually an interesting version of the sort of freemium example. Like for most people who don't really might know much about sort of freemium gaming business models, the conversion rate of people who become paid users is literally less than 3%. It's like only 1 or 2% that actually really convert into paid players, right? But those are the committed ones, right? And what happens in Web3, though, because of ownership,
If I might add,
Yes.
with Night Crows, we had around the launch, on day one, 24.8% conversion to paying user.
Right. And so my point was on Web3, because you have ownership, the conversion is much, much faster and much more accelerated, right? Which is why in Web3, you don't need to have a very large user base to still be sustainable, right? And actually to be profitable. So people might say, and often this is what happens in Web2, they look at Axie and they look at pixels and they say, oh, 750,000 users, that's cute, right? Right? But actually, most of the users actually do spend more. The ARPU, the value is higher. But of course, when you bring in something like Telegram, right, I think you have a larger base of users that come into that as a result as well. So I think it's all the flywheel that basically built it up.
Can I make this conversation a bit controversial?
Please.
You just said that in traditional games, conversion rate is about 3%.
On average.
25, almost 25% here. But let's be realistic. Most of these people they buy something in the game because they consider it as an investment. When in traditional games, they buy just because they like it. Usually, usually they do not consider it as an investment in Web2 games, right? They just do it because I don't know, they want progression, being like faster, or I don't know, they want to look better compared to their friends, etc.
Yeah. So to reply to that, it's still an investment, but it's a social investment. So my view is that humans in general are geared towards investing. But we don't but right now when we say investing, we often associate it with money. But for instance, if you invest in a relationship, if you invest in a partner, if you invest in your family, that's not money, but it's still an investment. And when the example I gave of the $100 billion that was spent in gaming, that's mostly all decorative. So there's no value, and you can't trade them. Everyone who buys a Fortnite skin knows he can't sell it. So why does he buy it? He doesn't buy it just because it looks cool. He buys it because his social status inside the game increases. So I agree with you, it's not financial per se, but it's still an investment in its nature. What happens in Web3 and somewhat in the real world is that money has become a social status too. Like you get the situation where I think some people who make a lot of money, suddenly a lot of money isn't enough. It's not, it doesn't make a difference if you go from, 1 billion to 2 billion for some of those billionaires out there. So what do? They buy a yacht, they buy a jet, they have houses, right? These are actual assets to do what? To show their social status, right? So I think in the gaming world, it's kind of similar. So I do think it's investment. I agree with you, it's not a financial investment, but the nature of it is the same. And I think because it's about their friends. My kids want, their Roblox items because of the social status, and they're willing to spend all sorts of money for it. But what happens if you could sell them in the future? I guess this is the Web3 promise, right? Yeah.
The only problem I actually see here is that maybe if you can sell it in the future, instead of considering it as an investment, we should consider it as a speculation then. It's a bit different. I mean, if you consider everything as investment, 100% agree. We invest as human beings, we invest in almost everything in our life, right?
Yes.
Time, money, whatever. But speculation is a bit different stuff, right? Investment, in my opinion, this is something like long-term. Speculation usually is a very short-term thing that you want to buy now, sell, not an investment. I mean,
I would argue we speculate a lot in love, for instance, right? Right. I mean, and I think I think the point to me, the correlation. I understand your point. I think the correlation in investment is risk, which is speculation, right? Yeah. So when you take a risk, how far you take a risk is the extent of the speculative activity. But even in a relationship, you will speculate and you will take a risk. Maybe this person is out of your league, but you'll still give it a go. Or maybe you want to play in your lane because you think that's right for you, whether it's not the case. Not that different from when I think you invest in something that you think seems safe, or you invest in something that might have high alpha, but maybe high risk. Right? I think, and by the way, I think of this as humans. We're geared to that. Like we want to, and I think if you don't have a risk-taking nature as a human, it's hard for you to actually live. Yeah.
But it's also connected with what you were saying, Yat, in your keynote about the literacy, right? People need to learn about the actual value of and the money within the games, right? That it's not really only fun, right? It can be also value as it was for the Philippines and so on. That's why I think Ton with enabling much more, let's say, casual users into Web3, right? Or Olympics with the compete to earn. This is also something that gives those people a little bit of those education, right? So they are aware that actually they can benefit of this and into a monetary value, right?
Michael, would you like to share your
I wanted to come back to user onboarding. It seems to be talked about quite a lot here. So you've said that game economy designers don't actually know economics, and I agree. However, what I think game designers do know from Web2 is how to onboard users. And speaking about 3% conversion rate in free-to-play, most of that conversion happens on day one, and that's what they do, and that's what they've been sort of improving over the years of the free-to-play model, and also that's part of the reason why it's become so difficult for developers, because I believe it's among the top 50 grossing games on the stores, Google Play and App Store. The average time since release is something like 5 to 7 years. So those games have been refined over the years, and it's really, really difficult for new developers to get onboarded and to enter that space. And you need huge marketing budgets, which you're basically spending, as you said, to Apple, Google, and all those other companies. So the point is that all those developers that know how to onboard new users, they are meant to say, if they're looking for new monetization models, they're looking for new places to deploy the games, to new ways to reach the audience, like for example on Ton or other platforms. And I believe that implementing those onboarding processes and learning from them in Web3, making it as easy as possible, and yet converting, for example, on level 45, introducing some new mechanics or introducing login only there, that totally makes sense, and that's something that's going to be crucial.
Maybe the one thing I just want to add is, I think whether it's a social network or whether it's gaming, they're actually not that different in the sense that ultimately it's a social network. In gaming design business, we basically use something called Bartle's model, which is a very popular gaming model. And it's a simplification, but essentially it divides it into basically 4 quadrants. You've got the killers, achievers, and the adventurers, and you've got the socials. 80% of the people who play a game play because it's social, right? And when you ask a kid why he's playing Roblox, it's not because it has the best graphics, or because it's the most adventurous or fun, or because you can kill anyone, right? It's because their friends are playing it. And that's actually the effect, right? And so one of the things that in Web3, I think when you look at the adventurers and the achievers, we can translate them for the time being as a kind of capitalist, right? They're the kind of people who come in and they have a certain game style, and then they bring their friends into that system. This is different with distribution outlets like Ton, which is much more broader, because remember before, Apple and Google refused distribution for Web3. So it was kind of artificially held back, right? And they still do, creating these funky rules, which I think, again, is a great opportunity for Ton. But actually, the social element so far in Web3 gaming has been artificially held back. So the growth we're seeing and the revenue we're seeing today comes despite the fact that distribution is locked, which to me is actually even more astounding. Which, imagine what happens when those gates open up. Yeah.
Yes. So since we already talked about the monetization, I would like to ask, is there any innovative monetization strategy that you've seen recently and recommend the new gaming projects to adapt?
Okay, so as an example, in Night Crows, the designers created actually 7 tokens within the game. So there is one main crow token, and then there are 6 different tokens which allow you to craft stuff or unlock and so on, which you can then trade on a decentralized exchange as well with other users. So that's one of the examples that I can tell in terms of Night Crows. But there are also other solutions. I think Michael can tell more about the Compete to Earn that is on Olympics. or there is like another Polish studio which does watch to earn, for example, right? So there's quite some experiments right now happening because I think we are still in the early days of figuring out what's the best approach and what's the kind of clash of clans of the Web3, where we will have like a stable tokenomics, the game economics tokenomics model inside, right?
I actually wanted to say here about like revenue share with users. I mean, when games try to, Web3 games basically try to monetize their games with more like a traditional things, like for example ads, and then share the revenue they get with the users. I actually love this approach because there are several teams doing it right now, at least 2 teams on Telegram do it. Notcoin, they basically did this. I mean, they had integrations with the advertisers, and they basically gonna distribute this value to users. So this is how things work at Notcoin. Also, Gamey team, as far as I remember, one of the Animoca portfolio companies.
That's right. Building on Tom, but yes.
Yeah, so they're doing the same. They have a game catalog on Telegram, and they're trying to get ads revenue, which then they distribute to users directly or indirectly with I don't know, Toncoin, their own token, whatever. So I love this model. I mean, I haven't seen it in the past a lot, but now I think that this model can be really interesting for game developers, especially if they have big audience. Because if you have big audience, you can monetize it with different types of ads, integrations, etc.
For me, if we're gonna go after players that are Web2 that don't yet understand Web3, then I think we have to go for monetization strategies that are easy to grasp, easy to understand for players that could have never heard about or could have never interacted with the wallet. I personally loved playing Notcoin because I love idle games, and that was my favorite genre always. So, and yeah, sharing revenue with users is one way, but for us, it's, as Stan mentioned, it's compete to earn. I think that, and I strongly believe that because that's something that's very easy to grasp. And for people that are not Web3 native, that are not onboarded to crypto, players can start playing without logging in. That's obviously one of the things that's very important. But if they want to compete, that's easy for a person that doesn't know anything about crypto. The simple idea that, oh, I'm playing this game, I feel like I'm good, so let's compete for some financial stakes. Okay, and the game onboards me to the process. That's easy for understand, and that's like directly translates to what players do in real life, basically, and that's why I believe it's gonna bring people from Web2, especially to crypto, if we do the onboarding process right.
So, I mean, there's a lot, but I would say one of the areas that we haven't even fully explored really is what you can do with ownership, which I think is a true innovation around Web3 and Web3 gaming as a whole. Whether it's play to earn, whether it's revenue sharing, whether it's other forms of validation, even airdrops, right? They come from the fact that you have ownership. So the base, as I see it, is that ownership is the platform of that. And the one thing that we've observed about ownership is it's brought in a new kind of gamer that didn't exist before. And I think it's important to remember that when mobile gaming became big, actually traditional console players were like, that's not a game, right? They hated it. And in fact, PlayStation 3 sold really badly because the gaming market was saturated, right? There was only 400 or 500 million gamers only, and they were playing 20, 30 games, a month. So it was saturating the hardcore gamer base. And then what happened was that when mobile gaming came, it didn't convert the hardcore gamers. It brought in an audience of new gamers who never played games before, not because it was mobile, but because through a swipe of a finger, they were pro gamers. And so your Angry Birds, Flappy Bird, sort of Clash Royale, all these games made someone who could compete with the console guy and actually with a finger was just as good. And so we became 3.4 billion gamers today. And of course, PlayStation 4 and 5, they sell out because a percentage of those, who were enjoying games were like, oh, I like Clash Royale and I like Candy Crush, but let me try that other game. And that actually is what built the funnel. But there's 3 billion people in the world who are not playing games. But they're playing another game in Web3, and they're playing the game of ownership. So when you look at NFT owners in games, when you look at people who own land in Sandbox, they don't play the game, but they're in the game. So I think there's a new category of gamer out there that's coming out that's kind of a passive gamer. He has an ownership/investor lens to it. My mom can participate with her grandkids. She can't play the game, but she can own assets. It brings a totally new group of people in there. And then some of them will translate down. So I think what we're doing right now is we're trying to squeeze the Web2 gamer, which is kind of a labor class of gaming I see, with a investor class, which is a capital class of gamer. And we're trying to merge them together. And we have them in industry, like Sims or Civilization or those type of games, right? But there's still a smaller percentage to the actual gamer out there. I think there's an element there that we're sort of not looking at the new gaming category that's out there that we're seeing in Web3 that is emerging, and we can nurture that. And they'll bring in the Web2 gamers, and then the conversion happens anyway, right? So I think the innovation on ownership, we've only scratched the surface on it.
Yeah, so we're kind of running out of time. Last question is, what trends do you predict will emerge in the Web3 gaming in the next few years?
I think it's going to be the maturing of the whole ecosystem. Of course, definitely a lot of different trials, approaches, etc. But in short, it will be growing. It will be like Yat said, like we had the hardcore kind of like Web1 type of games, like traditional gaming, and then mobile gaming came. And at the beginning, like the traditional gamers were like, that's not even a real game, right?
Yes.
But then it turned out it became huge. And I think we will be seeing something similar with Web3 soon.
100% agree, but also wanted to say that, in my personal opinion, as we see it, Ton, basically, gaming is the best and maybe even the only way to onboard like hundreds of millions of users into Web3. I mean, DeFi can basically, I think it can never onboard like, I don't know, a billion of users. Gaming can. So in my opinion, gaming is the most promising part of the whole Web3. Basically, it would be weird to hear from gaming lead the Ton Foundation something different, but it is what it is. Yeah, I think that gaming, Web3 gaming is on its very, very early stages. We've done like a lot of experiments already in like 5 years, but still, when we go and talk to, I don't know, traditional Web2 game developers, most of them look at you and they're like, oh, sounds a bit scammy, sounds a bit weird, but they will realize that, I think they will understand in like 1, 2, 3 years that gaming is the only way gaming is the only way to reach this Web3 audience first, and then there are a lot of opportunities for those game developers as well, as Yat basically said. So this is like what I expect from Web3 gaming in the next 2, 3 years, to grow, I don't know, 50, 100% times in number of developers. Oh. Mic doesn't work anymore. And the number of, and money, of course, yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And also I wanted to add to that point that have you tried showing a premium, like old school premium game developer an idle game, one of the classics like Bitcoin Billionaire? They were like, oh my God, it looks like a scam, right? And it's the same story. History likes to repeat itself.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I agree with everything that's been said. Many of the game developers used to resist freemium, right? Free to play was something they didn't like, and now freemium is basically more than half of the industry when it comes to actually user engagement revenue. I would say the one thing that I would say, there's hundreds and hundreds of games that are coming out in Web3 this year alone, and basically over the next 12 to 18 months. So we're going to see a similar boost, we think, in explosion of user adoption on Ton and outside as well, where these ecosystems grow very similarly to how mobile gaming developed in 2011 up to 2013. So we think it's kind of that era of time, which means we'll see hundreds of millions of users, we think, of people entering in Web3. But what's interesting about that is that we think those users will, if they're not yet, will become much more financially literate, which I think in turn will then fuel DeFi. So the console play in Web3 isn't a PlayStation, it's DeFi. If the gamer comes in and he learns about financial value, he's going to start trading. And he's not going to only trade his game assets. He's going to put liquidity, he's going on Uniswap, he's going on Ston, whatever it is. And that whole financial ecosystem and financial inclusivity will accelerate because of Web3 gaming.
Yeah, a lot of interesting takes. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, and I'm sure that many of us gain valuable insight for all your contribution. Thank you all for the esteemed panelists for your valuable time and intakes, and thank you.
And thank you, Zoe, for moderation.